HOA took my barn. I took their 5-kilometer lake with one twist and left them shocked. They thought it was over. I thought it was over. But I had one last move. One move that would destroy everything they'd built. The look on their faces when it all started, I'll never forget it. They thought they were in control, but I had something they didn't. And with one twist, I took everything. Can you guess what happened next? Hey there, welcome to our channel. I'm Mark, and today's story is about revenge and power. And the day I turned the tables on the HOA that thought they could take everything from me. I live in a quiet little neighborhood, tucked away where everyone follows the rules. Or at least, that's what they thought. I'm just a guy trying to live his life. Until the day the HOA decided to mess with me. And that's when everything changed. They thought it was over. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. And so were they. Because that's when I realized something. Something I never saw coming. The look on their faces when they figured it out. I'll never forget it. The sun had barely set that day, and the shadows were creeping over the neighborhood like they always did. Everything about this place was perfect. Or at least that's how it seemed on the surface. The manicured lawns, the perfectly trimmed bushes, the homes all standing in neat little rows like they were plucked straight from a magazine. It was the kind of place where everyone followed the rules, or at least pretended to. But the truth? Not everyone was as perfect as they seemed, and there was one group who had all the power, the HOA. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you'll know exactly what I mean. They start off with good intentions, but then the power goes to their heads, and before you know it, they're telling you how to live your life, what color your house can be, how tall your grass should be, what kind of flowers you're allowed to plant. It's a game they love to play. I remember the first time I received a letter from them. I thought it was a joke at first. Violation of HOA rules, the letter said, in big, bold letters. I was confused. What violation? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I kept my lawn mowed, my house in perfect condition. Everything was how it was supposed to be. So what could they possibly want now? The letter went on to explain that my barn, yes, my barn, the one I had built with my own hands, the one that had been on my property for years, was suddenly a problem. The HOA said it was unsightly and didn't fit with the overall aesthetic of the neighborhood. I stared at that letter, completely stunned. How could something that had been there for so long suddenly be a problem? I knew it wasn't about the barn. It was about control, and I wasn't going to let them have it. I remember calling up the president of the HOA. Her voice was sweet as honey, but I could hear the underlying smugness in her tone. She told me that the barn had to go. It wasn't a request. It was an order. She told me how important it was for the overall beauty of the community, and how we all need to maintain the standards set by the HOA. I told her I didn't think it was necessary. She told me I didn't have a choice. It was her way, or no way. But that's when something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to just stand there and let them take away something that mattered to me. I had worked so hard for that barn. It wasn't just a barn. It was a symbol of who I was, of all the sweat and effort I had put into this property, and now the HOA wanted to take that away from me, without evian and blinking. I knew they were powerful, but what they didn't know was that I had something they didn't. I had patience, and I had a plan. I spent the next few weeks doing exactly what they told me to do. I followed every rule they threw at me, every single one. But while they were busy thinking they were in control, I was getting ready to make my move. There was one thing they hadn't taken into account: the lake. Oh, they were so proud of their 5-dollar resort lake. It was the centerpiece of the community, the one thing they could hold over everyone's head. Everyone knew the HOA's power came from that lake. It was theirs, and they loved reminding everyone about it. But I wasn't going to back down. I started learning about that lake, how it worked, where the valves were, how much water was in it. I learned everything, because I knew one thing: if they thought they could take everything from me, then I would take something from them, something they loved. They had no idea what was coming, and when the time came, I'd make sure they'd regret ever messing with me. But here's the thing: I didn't just want to get back at them. It wasn't about revenge, at least not in the way they thought. No, what I really wanted was control. I wanted to show them what happens when you push someone too far, when you think you can just walk all over someone. And that's when I realized I wasn't just going to ruin their lake, I was going to take everything from them, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. Now here's the question for you. What would you have done if the HOA had taken something you loved? Would you have just rolled over and let them take it? Or would you have fought back, like I did? Tell me what you would have done in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It was a few days after that phone call, the one with the HOA president. I didn't know it at the time, but everything had already started shifting. I thought they had control. They thought they were winning. But I had something up my sleeve that they could never have predicted. For those first few days, I kept my distance from the HOA. I played along, did exactly what they wanted, and kept my head down. It was almost too easy. I made sure to follow every single rule to the letter, not one violation, not even a hint of rebellion. And I could see the smug smiles on their faces. They thought I was just another homeowner, easily manipulated. They thought they had me cornered, powerless. But that was the mistake they made. They underestimated me. One afternoon, as I was working in the yard, I saw the HOA president driving by, slow and steady, in her shiny black SUV. She slowed down as she passed my property, eyeing my barn like it was the devil's own creation. She must have thought she was making a point by looking. But that's when I realized it wasn't just about the barn anymore. It was about the power, the control they had over everyone. And that's when I started looking at the whole neighborhood differently. The lake wasn't just some fancy decoration for the HOA. No, it was a symbol, the crown jewel of their little empire, the one thing they could hold over everyone else's heads. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how fragile that control really was. They had built this massive resort lake. But what if it all came crashing down? What if instead of destroying my barn, I could destroy their entire sense of power? What if, with just one twist, I could pull the rug out from under them? It started to feel like a game, the kind of game where you wait, you watch, you listen, and then, when the time is right, you make your move. I spent my days gathering intel, learning about the lake, the valves, the water levels, the security around it. I studied the entire system. I needed to know everything about it, from the smallest detail to the biggest threat. Because I wasn't going to just break a rule, I was going to break their entire illusion of control. As the days went by, the HOA continued to send letters, each one more insistent than the last. Fines for every little thing. It was like a broken record, but every time I got a letter, I just smiled. They didn't know that I was learning. I was learning exactly what they valued, what they feared, and all the while, I kept playing their game, keeping my lawn perfect, my house immaculate, every little detail according to their rules. I was following their script, but for a reason. I was setting them up, piece by piece, and they didn't even know it. Then one afternoon I saw something. A man wearing a maintenance uniform, walking near the lake. He was checking the valves, looking around as if he was making sure everything was in place. I couldn't believe my luck. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had never seen this man before, but I knew exactly who he was. One of the HOA's staff, a part of their control machine. I watched him for a while, then casually walked over to the edge of the property, acting like I was just tending to my garden. But in reality, I was studying his movements, memorizing everything about that lake, that valve. And in that moment, I knew I had the power. All I had to do was twist that valve, and everything would change. The first time I went out there, I didn't touch a thing. I simply stood there, staring at that valve, imagining what it would feel like to turn it. How it would feel to watch that 5 ambient lake drain. I thought about the power it would give me. I thought about all the things I could do. And strangely, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing this because I could. Because I had the ability to take their power, their symbol of control, and make it mine. The thrill of it. It was intoxicating. The next morning, I took Tunnisas's first step. I made my way to the lake, keeping my movements casual, as if I were just another guy passing by. I found the valve. My heart raced, but I kept my cool. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move and I could be caught. But I wasn't worried. This was my moment. I twisted the valve, just a small twist at first. Then, as the water started to flow, I twisted it again and again, slowly at first, then more urgently, until the water started pouring out in a steady stream. I stood there, watching it. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking with excitement. But in that moment, I felt powerful. More powerful than I had ever felt in my life. I had just taken control of the one thing the HOA loved more than anything else. Their precious lake. The water kept draining, bit by bit, and all I could do was watch. But then, I heard a sound behind me, a voice. I turned around, and there she was. The HOA president, standing there with a look of disbelief on her face. I had no idea how long she had been watching. But it didn't matter anymore. It was too late. The damage was done. Now here's a question for you. If you had the chance to take control of the one thing your enemy cared about most, would you do it? Or would you hesitate, fearing the consequences? Let me know in the comments. What would you do in my shoes? The first thing I noticed when I turned around was the way she was standing. The HOA president, her arms crossed, her face locked in a mask of disbelief and fury. She had no idea how to react. And for a brief moment I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. She had never expected this. She had never expected someone like me, someone who would fight back, someone who wouldn't just bend to her will. But there she was, standing at the edge of the lake, watching it drain before her eyes, her precious 5 lake, gone, bit by bit. And all because of one simple twist of a valve. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my hands still shaking from the rush, the power. It was intoxicating. I could feel the weight of what I had done settling in, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control. It was about showing her and everyone else that no one could ever mess with me like that again. And as I watched her struggle to keep her composure, I knew something. I knew she wasn't going to let this go. Not by a long shot. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice cold, trembling with fury. I didn't answer right away. I just let the sound of the water draining fill the silence between us. Her eyes were darting between the water, then back to me, like she was trying to process what was happening. And then it hit me. She didn't know how to stop it. She couldn't, because she didn't know how the system worked. She didn't know what I knew. And in that moment, I realized I had them. I had all of them. Her voice broke through my thoughts. "You think this is funny? You think you can just—" I cut her off. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I think you've underestimated me. I think you've underestimated everyone you've ever pushed around in this neighborhood." Her face flushed. She took a step toward me, but then stopped, looking at the water again. "Turn it off," she said. Her words were sharp, demanding, but I wasn't about to play by her rules anymore. "I don't think I will," I said, just as calm as before. Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice low. "I doubt it," I replied, a small grin creeping onto my face. I turned away, stepping back from the valve, leaving her standing there. The water continued to drain, and I could almost hear her mind racing. She was losing her grip on everything, and I was loving every second of it. I wasn't sure what she'd do next, but I knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stop. She'd try to make me pay for this, try to get me back in line. But I was ready. I had already taken my first step, and there was no turning back now. The next few days felt like a blur. I went about my routine, keeping my distance from her and the HOA. But every time I saw someone from the board, I saw that look in their eyes, the fear, the realization that things weren't as under control as they thought. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just some guy with a barn. But now I had their lake, and I had the upper hand. But what I didn't expect was the way things escalated. I thought they'd just come after me with some legal threats, maybe a few fines. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was the complete and utter war that was about to break out. It started small at first. Letters in the mail, threats of lawsuits, fines piling up, each one more ridiculous than the last. But it didn't stop there. I started getting calls from neighbors, all of them wondering what the heck was going on. Some of them were worried. Others, I could tell, were just enjoying the chaos. It was like a slow burn. But I could feel the pressure building. They weren't going to back down, and neither was I. Then came the first face-to-face encounter. One morning, I was walking back from the mailbox when I saw a group of HOA members gathered by the entrance to the neighborhood. They were all staring at me. I stopped in my tracks, wondering if this was it, if they were finally going to do something. But instead of approaching me directly, they started whispering among themselves. I could hear bits and pieces of their conversation. How could he do this? We need to do something about this. He's making a mockery of everything we stand for. I knew they were talking about me, and that's when I realized just how far they were willing to go to maintain their power. The tension between us kept growing. I could feel the heat every time we crossed paths. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. And I knew they could feel it too. They could sense that I wasn't afraid of them anymore, that I had something they could never take away. I had the power to make them bend to my will, and I wasn't going to let them forget that. But there was one question that kept nagging at the back of my mind. How far were they willing to go to get their lake back? Would they try to destroy me completely? Or would they just let it go and admit they'd lost? What would you do if you were in their shoes? Would you keep fighting or walk away? Let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. I could feel the weight of what I had started settling in. It wasn't just about a barn anymore. It wasn't even about a lake. It was about something bigger. It was about control, about power, about who really ran this neighborhood, and now the HOA was about to find out that they weren't the only ones who could play dirty. The first few days after the lake started draining were quiet, too quiet. I thought maybe they'd back off, but I was wrong. I should have known better than to think they'd just let it go. It wasn't in their nature. They were like a snake, coiled tight, ready to strike at any moment. And I had just poked it with a stick. I woke up one morning to a letter in my mailbox. This wasn't the usual fine. This one was different. It was addressed to me directly, in bold, red letters. Final warning. HOA will take legal action if violations are not immediately addressed. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read it. This wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. I opened the door to get my mail, but as I stepped outside I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, parked in front of my house, was an official-looking van. A lawyer's van. I knew what this meant. They were serious now. The HOA wasn't just going to send me a letter and leave it at that. No, they were ready to drag me through the mud if that's what it took to make me pay, and I wasn't even sure if I was prepared for it. But I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. The lawyer got out of the van and walked toward me with a clipboard. He had that look, you know the one, the look of someone who thought they were about to ruin your life. "Mr. Ghaffar," he said, his voice cold and professional, "I'm here on behalf of the HOA. We need to discuss the damage you've caused." I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at him. "Damage?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "Yes," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "The lake, the resort property, the lost revenue." I couldn't help but laugh. It was all about money, wasn't it? For them, it had always been about money. "You've really come here to talk about a lake?" I said, incredulous. "While the neighborhood is falling apart with these ridiculous rules, you're coming after me for a lake?" He looked at me, unfazed. "I'm afraid you don't understand the gravity of the situation," he said. Oh, I understood, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I had already made my move, and now they were going to feel the consequences. The lawyer handed me a stack of papers, official-looking documents with lots of legal jargon I couldn't be bothered to read. "Sign these," he said. "These are the terms of the settlement." I took the papers, flipping through them quickly. It was clear what they were trying to do. They wanted me to fold. They wanted me to sign away my rights, admit fault, and pay for damages. But I wasn't going to do that. Not now. Not ever. Instead of signing, I looked the lawyer straight in the eye. "Tell the HOA that they can take their papers and stick them where the sun doesn't shine," I said. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "You're making a huge mistake," he said. I smiled. "Maybe," I replied, "but it's a mistake they'll regret." The lawyer left, but the war had officially begun. That was just the beginning of what was about to be the nastiest, most drawn-out battle I had ever fought. They were going to come after me with everything they had, and I was ready. I wasn't just going to let them take my barn. I wasn't just going to let them mess with me. I was going to make them regret every decision they had ever made. The HOA thought they had control, but they were wrong. I had already taken their lake, and now I was going to take their pride. I spent the next few weeks on high alert, waiting for the next move. The HOA didn't waste any time. Fines, threats, legal actions, they were relentless. But I wasn't intimidated. If anything, it fueled me. I started doing my research, looking into every little rule, every little clause in the HOA's contracts. I learned everything I could about them, their bylaws, their power structure, because I knew that the best way to fight them wasn't just with petty retaliation. It was with knowledge. Knowledge was power. And now, I had more than enough to take them down. One afternoon, I got another visit. This time, it was from the HOA president herself. She stood at my door, looking like she'd just walked out of a board meeting, her face red and fuming. "I'm done playing games," she said, her voice tight with anger. "This has gone on long enough." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I couldn't agree more," I said. She glared at me. "You think you're winning? You think you can get away with this?" "I'm not trying to win," I said. "I'm just trying to show you that I can fight back." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," she said. But there was something in her voice that told me she was scared. And that, my friend, was all I needed to know. The tension in the air was palpable. The HOA president stood there, steaming with rage, and I stood calmly in my doorway, waiting for her next move. But what was she really going to do? She couldn't stop the lake from draining, she couldn't force me to sign anything, and I could see the fear in her eyes. I had broken her, and now I was going to make her pay for underestimating me. Now, here's a question for you. If you were in my shoes, would you keep fighting back against the HOA? Or would you cave in to their pressure, hoping they'd leave you alone? What would you do? Let me know in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you think. I had expected the HOA to come after me with everything they had, but I wasn't prepared for just how far they were willing to go. They weren't just playing petty games anymore. No, they had crossed a line. And now, the war was about to escalate. It started with a phone call, the kind of call that made my stomach drop. The voice on the other end was cold, calculated, and filled with authority. "We're moving forward with legal action," the lawyer said, his tone blunt. I could hear the faint sound of papers rustling in the background. "You've left us no choice. The HOA is filing a lawsuit to recover the damages caused to the lake and the property." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. A lawsuit? That was their response? I had expected this, of course. But hearing those words out loud hit harder than I thought it would. I was ready for this, though. I had done my research. I had scoured the HOA's bylaws, their legal jargon, everything. I wasn't going to let them steamroll me just because they had more money and power. I had the upper hand now. I had the knowledge, and that made me dangerous. The next day, I got a knock at the door. It was the HOA president, standing on my doorstep, her expression darker than ever. She wasn't just angry now. She was desperate. "Mr. Ghaffar," she said, her voice tight, "you've taken this too far." I crossed my arms, looking down at her, no sympathy in my eyes. "I think you're the one who took it too far when you destroyed my barn," I replied. She didn't flinch. Instead, she held up a folder, thick, full of legal documents. "This is your last chance," she said, her voice low, almost threatening. "Sign this, and we'll drop the lawsuit. If you don't, we'll be taking this to court." I glanced at the paper she was holding out, a settlement offer. But I could already tell it was a trap. They wanted me to fold, to admit defeat, and just give up. But I wasn't going to do that. I had spent too long standing my ground to back down now. I stepped back and shook my head. "No deal," I said firmly. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You'll regret this," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. But as she walked off, I saw something in her eyes. Fear. And that's when I knew. I had her. She was losing control, and I was just getting started. The next few days were a blur of legal threats, more fines, and constant pressure from the HOA. But it wasn't just about the threats anymore. It was about the mind games. They were trying to break me, make me bend, make me fear them. But I wasn't afraid. In fact, the more they pushed, the more determined I became. I knew they were scrambling, They were getting desperate, and that made them unpredictable. And when people are desperate, they make mistakes. I wasn't about to let them slip up. I was going to make sure they paid for underestimating me. But as I was dealing with the HOA's constant barrage of threats, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but as I read it, my stomach dropped. It was a warning. They knew everything. They knew about the valve. They knew I had tampered with the lake. But there was more. The letter was clear. The HOA wasn't the only one I had to worry about. The letter warned me about certain people who were getting tired of the drama. People who had connections to the HOA but weren't quite as interested in following the rules. I couldn't tell if it was a bluff or if it was real, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't just some random threat. Someone out there had a vested interest in making sure I didn't win. And now I was going to have to deal with more than just the HOA. I had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing. They were coming for me. The tension in the air was thick now. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my neighbors. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. The HOA kept sending their legal threats, and now this anonymous group had entered the picture. It was like being stuck in a game of chess, and I was playing against opponents who were always one move ahead. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything I had already gone through. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for them to come for me. I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard. It was time for me to make a move. I started gathering evidence, documenting everything I could. I knew I had to be smart. One wrong step, and I could lose everything. But if I played my cards right, if I outsmarted them, I could flip the script. The HOA thought they had all the power, but I was about to show them how wrong they were. And then, just as I was putting my plan into motion, the phone rang again. It was the HOA lawyer. "We've escalated the situation," he said, his voice cold. "You've made your bed. Now you're going to lie in it." I smiled to myself. "Try me," I said, before hanging up. I was done playing nice. The game had changed, and now I was ready to finish it. Now here's the real question. If you were in my position, how would you deal with an anonymous group trying to sabotage you and an HOA that's determined to destroy you? Would you stay quiet, or would you make a move before they get to you? Let me know in the comments below. Your opinion could change everything. They thought they had me, but the truth was, they had no idea what they were up against. Every letter, every threat, every attempt to break me only pushed me further. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let them win, not when I knew the game wasn't over yet. The war had gone from petty games to full-blown chaos. The HOA had escalated things, and I had no choice but to retaliate. I wasn't just fighting for my barn anymore. I was fighting for something bigger. I was fighting to prove that no one could control me, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. It had been weeks since I first turned that valve, and every day the HOA had made it their mission to wear me down. They flooded my mailbox with legal documents, threats, fines, but I didn't care. They could send me 1,000 letters, and it wouldn't change a thing. I had been pushed too far, and now the game was on my terms. But something had shifted inside me. I could feel the weight of it every time I walked down the street. Every time I saw the HOA president's smug face or heard the whispers from my neighbors, I knew. They were afraid. They were beginning to see the cracks in their control. And it wasn't just the lake that had drained. It was their power. It was slipping away, little by little. One day, I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting it, but when I opened the door, I saw a face I didn't recognize. A man, tall and lean, wearing a suit and tie. His eyes were cold, calculating, like a shark sniffing out its prey. "I'm here to discuss the matter with the HOA," he said, his voice smooth, but with an edge. I didn't invite him inside, but I didn't need to. I stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, ready for whatever he was about to throw at me. He pulled out a folder, much like the lawyer had done before, and handed me a thick stack of papers. "This is your last chance," he said, his eyes scanning me like he was trying to figure me out. I took the papers from him, flipping through them quickly. It was a final settlement offer, a deal I knew was too good to be true. They were trying to buy me off, and for a moment I almost thought about taking it, but then I remembered everything they had done, everything they had taken. "No deal," I said firmly, sliding the papers back across the table. His eyes flickered with something: anger, frustration, maybe even disbelief. He wasn't used to people saying no. And that's when I saw it. The cracks were showing. They were scared. They thought they could break me, force me into submission. But what they didn't understand was that I had already won. He stood there, speechless for a moment, and then his voice dropped lower. "You're making a huge mistake, Mr. Ghaffar. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I tilted my head, meeting his cold gaze. "No," I said slowly. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I've been dealing with people like you my whole life." He narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he repeated. But now I knew. He wasn't threatening me anymore. He was threatening my world. And that's when I knew what had to be done. I spent the next few hours planning. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to take the next step. The stakes were higher than ever. I wasn't just dealing with the HOA anymore. I was up against a machine that didn't care who it crushed along the way. But I wasn't afraid. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to back down now. The night before the next big HOA meeting, I got another anonymous letter. This one was different. It was clear, straightforward, and it carried a promise. The words were simple, but the message was loud and clear. "You're not the only one who has allies." At first, I didn't understand it, but as the meaning sank in, I realized something. I wasn't the only one fighting against the HOA. There were others out there. Others who had been silently watching, waiting for their moment. And now, I had their support. The next morning, I was ready. I walked into the HOA meeting like I owned the place. I wasn't going to let them intimidate me anymore. The board members were sitting there, eyes scanning me, but they had no idea what was coming. They tried their usual tactics, threatening, belittling, trying to shake me. But this time, I had something they didn't. I had the truth. I had the facts. And I had the power of the neighborhood behind me. I stood up, cleared my throat, and slammed a folder onto the table. "I'm done with this," I said, my voice steady. "The lake is gone. The rules are gone. And you can either accept that, or I will make sure every single one of you regrets ever stepping into my life." The room fell silent, and for the first time since this all started, I saw fear in their eyes. The meeting ended with a mixture of stunned silence and quiet whispers, but I knew something had changed. They couldn't ignore me anymore. I had taken control of the narrative, and they were powerless to stop me. The tables had turned. Now, I want to know, what would you do in my shoes? If you had the power to flip the script on the people who tried to destroy you, would you stand up and fight back, or would you keep playing their game? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I could feel the weight of the moment. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time in weeks, I could see it in their eyes. Fear. The HOA had never faced anyone like me before. They were used to running the show, used to making people like me bend to their will. But today, it was different. I wasn't just fighting for my barn or for the lake. I was fighting for my dignity. I was fighting to make them pay for thinking they could control me. And I was about to show them just how wrong they were. The meeting room felt cold and sterile, like a courtroom. I could see the board members fidgeting in their seats, trying to maintain their usual confident masks. But it wasn't working. I could hear the whispers, the nervous glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. They were afraid. And in that moment, I knew I had already won. The HOA president, her face a mask of stone, tried to regain control of the room. "We need to talk about the damages you've caused," she started, her voice icy and firm, trying to regain some semblance of authority. I wasn't going to let her control the conversation this time. "I'm done talking about damages," I said, my voice steady and confident. "Let's talk about what you've really done." The silence that followed was deafening. She wasn't expecting that. I wasn't just the homeowner anymore. I was the one in charge. I was the one who held the power. "You've been using your power to manipulate and intimidate this entire neighborhood," I continued, my words cutting through the silence. "You've used your position to take advantage of people, to bully them into submission. But you've underestimated me. You've underestimated everyone you've ever pushed around." I could see her jaw tightening, her fists clenching under the table, but I wasn't finished. "Do you know what happens when you push someone too far? When you think they'll just fold under pressure?" I asked, my gaze locked on her. "You get me, and I'm not going anywhere." The room was still. Everyone was watching, waiting for the next move. I could feel their eyes on me, some with doubt, others with awe. But none of them dared to speak. None of them dared to challenge me now. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person in this neighborhood who had been bullied, threatened, or silenced by the HOA. I was fighting for the people who had no voice, for the ones who had given up because they thought they had no choice. And now, I had the power to change that. "Here's what's going to happen next," I said, standing up taller, my voice booming in the quiet room. "I'm not going to sign any papers. I'm not going to back down. And I'm not going to let you destroy me or anyone else. You've already lost, and now I'm going to make sure you never forget that." There was a moment of silence, pure, tense silence. The HOA president opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had nothing left to say. And the other board members, they were too stunned to speak. I could see the cracks forming in their confident facades. They were breaking, and I was enjoying every second of it. But then, something unexpected happened. The door to the meeting room opened, and in walked a familiar face. One of my neighbors, someone who had stayed quiet throughout this whole ordeal. They stood there for a moment, their eyes scanning the room before they looked at me. "I've had enough," they said, their voice clear and strong. "We've all had enough. You're not alone in this fight. We stand with you." It was like a domino effect. One by one, more of my neighbors walked into the room, each of them making their stand. They were all here now, standing beside me. The power of the HOA was no longer just in their hands. It was in ours. The board members looked around the room, their faces pale with shock as the people they had tried to control for so long rose up. They couldn't believe what was happening. And for the first time, I saw true fear in the HOA president's eyes. She was no longer the one in charge. The tables had completely turned. "Do you see this?" I said, looking directly at the president. "This is what happens when you push people too far. We're done being your puppets. We're done being your victims." I looked around at the people who had come to stand with me. People who had once been too afraid to speak up. "We've got power now, and we're taking it back." The HOA president stood up, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice trembling. "Oh, we're not done yet," I said, my voice cutting through her anger like a knife. "Actually, we are." The meeting ended with the HOA members leaving the room, their faces full of shock and frustration. They had no plan, no way to fight back now. And as they walked out, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, not because of the lake or the barn, but because we had won something much more important. We had won our freedom. So here's the question I want to ask you. If you were in my shoes, and you had the power to turn the tables on those who had tried to control you, what would you do? Would you take back what's rightfully yours, or would you play it safe and let them win? What would your next move be? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it.